All right, welcome back everyone to our part 2 look at distributive justice. If you recall, last class we looked at distributive justice, which was using Tamar Gendler's definition. What is the proper distribution of burdens and benefits in society? Who gets what and who pays for it? And I sort of introduced two ideas out there. Should we distribute resources based on people's abilities? Like if if Mr. Russell makes 4 times as many pizzas as Mr. Doak, should he get paid 4 times as much because he's adding 4 times as much value? Even though his needs, he's 19, all of his money goes to superfluous baubles and trinkets and such, whereas most of my money goes to pay for my kids, my health care, my medications, like, what we would consider genuine needs. And we looked at John Rawls, who's really the great apologist for central planning, and had his veil of ignorance, the original position where he thought that if you didn't know where in society you would be born, you would choose a position or a society where even the least off had the same basic liberties and rights, and that even though there's still inequality in terms of social and economic status and positions, those inequalities are available to anyone, and that they benefit the least advantaged in society. And the way it benefits everyone is taxation. So if you really want to think about it, John Rawls is the great apologist for taxation. He says, this is why it's okay to tax people and use that money. It's okay that they have it because if you weren't born, you would choose a society that was taking care of everyone. That was taking care of the least off to some basic standard, right? Which we're going to look at. What constitutes a basic or adequate access to healthcare, right? What are the basics? Food, water, healthcare, and shelter, maybe. We don't really need much beyond that besides some human contact. Can I get a witness? What? Quarantine life. So, if you recall from the video, he is the big planner, this big central planner, and he thinks it is the role of social institutions to ensure justice. And this is justice understood from this disadvantaged perspective. And remember, the reason he likes the original position is because it takes away our bias. Because otherwise, all those issues of inheritance tax, minimum wage, health care, right? All those things people disagree on because we come from our own cave. And he says, if we were really disembodied and didn't know where in society, we would all probably settle on these two principles, which, if we had a class, I would say, do we agree with these? Do we disagree with these? Not everyone necessarily has to agree with these, but they're fairly reasonable. Yeah. So what's wrong with that? Well, along comes Robert Nozick. And Robert Nozick was a student of John Rawls. And Robert Nozick says, it really doesn't matter. Let's go back to that time slice. Where's that time slice? We would say that this top distribution is not fair. It's not just, right? But, and this is like a time slice, right? If we took a snapshot of wealth, this is the distribution, right? John Rawls would say it's not fair, right? It's an outcome. He's an outcome-based thinker, right? Different people have inequalities. Robert Nozick says, you know what? It really doesn't matter who has what. What matters is how they got it. He's process-based or historically oriented, right? He says what matters is how they got it. Did they steal it? Did they deceive someone or coerce someone or kill somebody? Because if they got it honestly and legitimately, you have no justification to distribute it. So if this wealth inequality, and I'm not saying, believe me, get my face up in here, right here. I am in no way saying that the wealth inequality in America was gained through legitimate free market means or open capitalism. The collusion between big corporations with corporate welfare and governments and handouts and lobbyists and no bid contracts given out is entirely contrary to what Robert Nozick is projecting. But those institutions will use his logic. You will hear his name. He's the principal libertarian next to Ron Paul these days, right? You will hear that reasoning used in support of these no bid contracts and this collusion. It's infinitely more valuable and economically sound for a big corporation to hire one lobbyist, pay him $500,000 to dribble in politicians' ears. It gives them millions in deals, in tax breaks, and all sorts of wiggle around workarounds, right? Just so I have that caveat on the screen. But Robert Nozick says it doesn't matter. Oh, come here. He says what matters is he has the entitlement theory. He says what matters is how they got it and how they transferred it. You know, if you planted, get my face up here, get something like lean on. If you planted a garden, built a fence around it, harvested those apples or potatoes or tomatoes and sold them, you're entitled to all that money, no matter how much it is. And no one has any legitimate, and if you want to give all of that money from those tomatoes to your child, God bless you, that's your right. The government can't tax it or take it away. It's illegitimate. Taxation is theft, he would say. And we'll look at that in a little bit. Now, why is he so against taxation, right? Or, just this idea of free association? Well, Nozick has what he calls the Wilt Chamberlain example, which you saw. And basically he says, if we're gonna go, let's assume, get out of here. Let's assume we get John Rawls' system. It's going to require one of two things. Either you have to constantly have government interference to prevent people from transferring holdings as they wish. What does he mean by this? Maybe there's high-end technology or health systems that are super expensive and only the super rich can access them. If you're John Rawls, you might think that letting some access and not letting others access due to their inability to pay is a violation of their basic human rights, right? Or what's more commonly the case is you have constant government interference to take resources from some and give it to others. So the Wilt Chamberlain example is through the free market, someone like a super basketball player or LeBron James does like enough slam dunk shows that people voluntarily come and give their money to, that he amasses a great fortune. Well, if you look at John Rawls' model, this time slice, outcome based orient, eventually you're going to have to take some of LeBron James's and Wilt Chamberlain's money and give it to the people who aren't gathering resources as effectively themselves or adding as much value in the community. And he says, one, that's stealing, or two, if you prevent people from transferring holdings, like for instance, we have laws against organ sales or prostitution in many areas, or all the illicit drugs out there, right? And we do those things in an effort to be just and fair and take care of our citizens. But Nozick says, this is more unjust. John Rawls, if you institute this policy, that's more unjust than just letting people freely associate as long as they're not deceived, coerced, threatened. They have a right to sell things and amass wealth, even if those things are snake oil, right? Or cure-alls, panaceas. And so, all right, so let's try this thinking out. Some overthoughts. We've looked at Rawls, central planning, the role of government to ensure same basic liberties and allow inequalities to benefit everyone and be open to everyone. Nozick saying, you know what, it doesn't matter who has what when. What matters is how they got it. Did they get it fairly through the open market, through trade and negotiation? Did they use deceit, coercion, force, threat? If not, then they're entitled to it, even if it's 10 billion bloody dollars. And they should be able to give all of it to their child without it being taken away by theft, stolen from them. Yeah? So what do we like and dislike about the end state, John Rawls outcome-based versus the process-based approach to distributive justice? What seems like a more comprehensive understanding of what's fair, right? Is it fair that really successful people have millions of dollars? Kind of seems like it is, doesn't it? Is it also fair that the people who are least, successful and prosperous and often most disadvantaged with the least resources available to them, is it fair that they have some basic safety net provided by these super rich societies that allow all of this opportunity and flourishing by other people who are very similar to them in all basic ways, except maybe ability and performance and values? But you know me, I can point out a dozen areas of human nature that we all share, right? Is that fair? They seem both, hopefully, you see the tension. Whose ideas does modern America most reflect? Is it wrong for the government to tell us how to spend our money? So let's move through these together, and then I will give a brief, hammering for free market. Inheritance tax. Who supports the inheritance tax? Ding, 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 ding. John Rawls supports the inheritance tax. Why? Because he thinks that, one, it still allows inequalities and same basic liberties, but it advantages and helps the least advantaged. Eminent domain. Again, he would say John Rawls would be in support of the eminent domain. Robert Nozick would say, no, if a person owns their property, you can't force them to sell it. That's theft. That's force. You can't take a portion of a person's wealth when he gives it to his son. That's theft. Minimum wage laws, John Rawls would say, no, they take care of the least advantaged in society, even if they're forcing employers how to distribute their property that they rightfully own and earned, right? Universal health care. John Rawls obviously is the one in support of it, the central planning guy. He says, no, we would want, if you hadn't been born yet, you didn't know where you would want to be born into a society that had basic health care for the poorest in case you were that poor, right? Healthcare is one of those basic things. Yeah. Nozick would say, no. Universal health care basically says that you're justified in taxing other healthy people to provide health care for the poor people who are neglecting their health, eating bacon and cigarettes and diet soda all day long, just, haven't worked out beyond lifting a remote and walking, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to be more disparaging. Nozick's against it. Rawls is for it. Selling human organs. Or, I would say my other favorites is prostitution, right? Oh, if I could spell it. Prostitution. Who's in support of it? Who's against it? Selling organs. Robert Nozick says, if you transact freely, voluntarily, without deceit, threat, coercion, you're entitled to it. Do you own your organs? Damn right you own your organs. You should hope so. Okay, maybe you're a steward of your organs. I'll give you that. That's a nice pivot. Well, if someone's offering you $1 million for a kidney, and you need that $1 million to pay for bills or your kid's college, like, you have a right to do that. Yeah. John Rawls would say no. Now, why would John Rawls say no? John Rawls would say no because it preys upon the least advantaged in society. Who are the people who are likeliest to sell their organs? It's not the super rich, I promise you. So you can see that he would say, no, this is an inequality that does not support the least in society. What about prostitution? If someone wants to sell sex for money and someone wants to sell money for sex, isn't that their right? Well, Robert Nozick would say, as long as there's not coercion, threat, force, have at it. It's free market, free association. John Rawls would say, no, because who are the people who usually, not always, there's plenty of high-end sex workers out there, engage in prostitution? Well, it's the most disadvantaged, the most desperate, the least off, the poorest, right? You see the point. American Medical Association. Who supports it? Who's against it? Now that you've thought about it. John Rawls is in support of it. Why? Because the American Medical Association vets doctors, procedures, treatments, ensures that the least in society are taken advantage of. Now, why would Robert Nozick, who is against the American Medical Association on principle, he'd say, well, it unfairly restricts people's ability to do business with each other. You need to be licensed and regulated through this institute, which is preventing and interfering with people's free transactions, right? That people should be able to do business, and you should be able to go to some shaman doctor or a holistic, homeopathic, naturopathic, whatever. But you get the point. So let's take something like healthcare. We can see why Rawls is a big fan of healthcare, right? Because Rawls says, yeah, obviously this benefits the least advantaged in society. If you're going to be taxing people for anything, tax them, provide healthcare. I think that's a big argument. If you're going to be taxing anyone more than corporate welfare and our foreign policy, in my opinion, I would say, yeah, maybe boost schools, maybe give some basic level of healthcare. Now, we're going to look at things like EMTALA, which already establishes at a very base level. This is the Emergency Management Treatment and Labor Act, something like that. I think I got it. Which says that if you come into an ER with life-threatening conditions, they can't refuse to treat you due to your inability to pay, right? So a homeless person coming in cardiac arrest will get care, even though that care usually costs over $1,000 a visit to the hospital, right? So John Rawls' argument for healthcare is clear. Why is Robert Nozick so against this, right? Why are libertarians just this classic, Ron Paul, whatever? Well, just because you may never ever hear this again, I want to walk you through it. I mean, rarely do you see a three-letter argument that is so clear. Taxation is theft. Like, oh my God, what are you talking about, Mr. Dope? Well, yeah, isn't it? What is theft? Taking people's property without consent? You're like, well, I agree to pay my taxes. Okay, well, like, let's say you forgot. What would happen? Well, at first, they'd send you like a very flowery, nicely worded letter in the mail. And if you ignored it and didn't respond, they'd send you another letter. This one would be shorter, much more curt. You continue to live your own life. Eventually, they would send armed men to your door to take you away, right? Like, we know that taxation is not voluntary, right? Behind it is the threat of force, a monopoly of force, if you look at it. And so the libertarian argument runs taxation is theft. Like, okay, yeah, it's stealing, but we do good things with it, right? Roads, schools, hospitals, fire department, police department. Like, I love these things, but it is stolen, right? You say, well, the ends justify the means. Now, if we were in class, I would make a lot of arguments that I'm not going to make here, but I do not find that argument very compelling. And to really drive it home, the reason taxation is theft is such a strong thing is the reason why theft is so bad, right? Because theft amounts to forced servitude. Say, Mr. Dope, that seems a little strong. Maybe, maybe not. Let's see. When Haiti was destroyed or Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, could you be forced to go work there for free, take 2 weeks out of your life and go down there and work for free? No, that's not fair. That's not just. We don't think that's a thing we can do. But I can take 2 weeks worth of your wages, your labor, hours you spent working, right? And take that money, taxes, and send it over here or bail out GE or, the car makers or Halliburton or Goldman, JP, or all these institutions. I can take your hard-earned work and bail out others. That amounts to forced servitude. So when they say taxation is theft, they say, like, you making me work for you and garnish my wages against my will is basically slavery. I mean, that might be an insult to people who actually live in slave conditions, right? Because you're just going home to your PlayStation, right? But the principled argument is that taxation is theft. It is a forced distribution of your resources, and that amounts in the long run to a forced distribution of your labor against your will. And the circumstances might be different, but that's the argument. So I just want to make the libertarian argument why they think it's so bad. Next, we will look at the next applications directly relating to healthcare as a right and healthcare costs. All right, see you guys soon.